My name is Jim Bartleson. I'm from the Chicago office of Produce Business, and we're part of the group that's hosting the London Produce Show. Hope everyone's enjoying themselves so far. Who went to the cocktail party last night? Everyone? Plenty to drink, plenty to eat? Everyone had some fun?
Superb.
And how about breakfast this morning?
Brilliant.
Good, good, good. Well, we're going to continue with that thought of brilliance with Professor Gomez, who I've had the good fortune of listening to and presenting at a variety of shows, including the New York Produce Show, the London Produce Show. Always provides wonderful information. Today he's talking to us about global forces, the global produce industry, and the implications for the UK. So without further ado, Professor Gomez.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and hopefully we have 15 minutes for questions. And I want to talk about forces that are making industry more globalized. And I always do this in several programs in the US, focusing on what the implications are in the future for the US industry. So I am building on that too, but focusing on the UK even. And this is with the research associate Gia Lee in Cornell University. I work there. I am an agricultural economist and focusing on food markets. So I have a little quiz for you. What is the share of imports in UK fruit consumption? Anybody tell me. What percent of the fruits that you consume in the UK are imported? 80%. 80%? Yeah?
65.
65, 91%. 91% of fruit consumption in the UK are imports. And what about vegetables? What percent of vegetables that are consumed in the UK are imported?
40%.
Huh?
40?
46%, very close. So see that that UK consumers, the incidence of imports is very important. And as well, the UK is an exporter of certain products. So when you teach economics 101 and think about trade, all the examples from history come from the UK because of the situation of the country, the particular endowments, not only for food but for producing other products, make a country that is always trading internationally. So, just one question more. What is the most important fruit in the UK? Which one do you think it's?
Bananas?
Huh?
Bananas?
No. No. Grapes. And the most important vegetable, which one is?
French beans?
No. Tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes. 15%, 15%. Of share of imports in both fruits and vegetables and grapes. In terms of value, okay. So the agenda today is to talk a little bit about the drivers and trading, international trade for fruits and vegetables, which I think are going to affecting the industry, but are going to do it much more in the future. Then we are going to talk about dive into the trade situation in terms of imports, export of the UK, and we are going to talk about other factors. And I think in this last one, we are just going to talk about Brexit. We were talking about earlier here about the uncertainties, what are going to be the effects of Brexit, exiting the EU on the sector. So very briefly, there are many factors influencing trade, and I'm going to be touching upon some of these as we move in the presentation. But there are definitely supply factors that are related to climate, your location, the technology that you have for production and post-harvest, the costs, the factor endowment, how much water, how much land, how much labor do we have, and the available infrastructure, especially for fresh produce. Then there are some drivers that are influencing demand. Rising incomes, we'll show you some numbers now. rapid urbanization processes that are making that our food supply chains in general, but in particular fruit supply chains, become longer and longer. Yeah? When we were in a rural society, markets were local. Now supply chains are extremely long and likely to get longer. Increasing middle class population, and then consumers are becoming very, very high expectations they have, and year-round demand for fresh produce is a precondition to compete for retailers everywhere. Not only in rich countries, but also in emerging countries. More and more you find fresh produce, all products, all assortment available year-round, and increasing health concerns. Then there are institutions that are important, the Common Agricultural Policy in the US, in the UK, in the EU, the North American Free Trade Agreement, for example, that has been very important in North America, and the proliferation of new trade agreements between countries. So all these things are shaping trends. So the key, the bottom line here is that we have seen an dramatic increase in trade of fresh produce due to lower prices because of trade, and to lower prices and improved quality resulting from lower tariffs and improved technology to bring product from production locations to demand locations. I just want to talk about some issues on demand that are likely to be very impactful in the future. And when we look at population growth, expected population growth, I think this figure, we need to think about that. How this, because food demand is changing, is growing very different in different parts of our planet. And this is a projection between today or last year and less than 25 years, so this is not very far away. But when you look at this, where are the places that are increasing? So you think about it, we are going to add about a little bit more over 2 billion people in the next 25 years. But where is this increase happening? Of course, we know that Asia has the largest population, and they are going to add still over 700 million people in the next 25 years. But most of the growth is going to happen in Africa. Notice that the growth here is going to more than double population, adding 1.3 billion people. And if you look at the rest of the regions, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, North America population low, and in Europe even decreasing, Latin America increasing modestly, same in North America increasing modestly, but you see that these populations here are not only becoming larger in terms of population, but more affluent. These are the regions that are experiencing, in terms of GDP growth, fastest growing regions, even though today levels of GDP of income is still low relative to other regions. So why is this important? Because the global produce industry, as this new configuration of geography, these populations here are going to demand more fruits and vegetables fresh. And in case, for example, as I showed you, in Asia, the per capita consumption of vegetables, for example, is much higher than anywhere else in the world, and they are still consuming more and more vegetables. So the other one is urbanization. Just some numbers here. So to give you, countries are becoming much more urbanized. So city populations are growing up at a rate of 65 million people every year. So that's about 7 times the size of the city of Chicago. So this is very substantial. Another figure that is interesting is that there are going to be about 450 cities in emerging markets that will account for nearly half of the global GDP. So these are going to be the most important consumers in the future. And another figure is that emerging economies are taking a larger share of the world economy. It's about 1/3 today. By in 7 years is going to be about half. So these are things that are not future, this is near future. And I think all these aspects, Jim, and these presentations are going to be available.
They will, yes.
So for sure you will see these figures. But these are to think that in the next 25 years there are going to be some changes, not only in production but also the origins of where the demand for fruits and vegetables is happening, and in general for food, but in particular also for fruits and vegetables. So if you look at consumption trends, and this is based on the Food and Agriculture Organization, it's not perfect because it's based on disappearance. It's what you produce plus what you import minus what you export. And there are many things that are not taken into account here, but this is basically trying to get an idea of per capita consumption. So if you think, and I include here the UK, the US, other European countries, and some Asian countries, and this is not very recent because this is the most recent year that FAO has that you can do these calculations. But what's interesting here is that per capita consumption in kilograms per year in UK and in many other countries is rather flat. We see that Japan and Korea consume more per capita vegetables, in general substantially more, almost double according to these figures. And it's also flat, but we see that in China, mainland China, mostly increasing and much more. So the key message here is that per capita consumption in more developed countries, and in countries that in other countries such as Japan and Korea, even though we know about the importance of consuming more vegetables, so per capita consumption is still flat. Still flat, and this is true in the US and in the UK by looking at these figures and everywhere. So the industry is still struggling how to boost demand. So people consume more on a per capita basis, because you see the figures, basically the growth in the global industry is going to happen by population growth, rather than increasing per capita consumption, especially in developed countries where consumption is not increasing. And then in fruits, see a lot of more variability here, but the story is not very different. If you look at the UK here, these are consumption per capita, between 80 and 120 kilograms per year. So it's rather flat for the past 10 years, between 2002 2013. And in general, all the countries, you take into account Japan, Ireland, Canada, China shows a rapid increase per capita consumption. It's very interesting. China has a plan of, they have lots of problems with land management and preservation for land for agriculture, and air pollution, and the strategy is to use orchards, basically apples, pears, and other products, to reshape the landscape of certain regions in China. So apple production in China is going to skyrocket very soon, and is apparently per capita consumption is increasing as well. So these are some general trends. Organic fresh produce industry, very important because it's outperforming every year in terms of trade and in terms of production, in terms of consumption, is outperforming conventional in every core market. In developed regions, steady growth, and in developing regions, the demand for organics is increasing dramatically. For example, in China, this is just produce, 30% increase in demand for organic products. In 2016, the most in South Africa, 16%. Driving factor, product availability in retail, development of e-commerce, and more direct sellers selling organic. And targeting specific consumer segments with these organic fresh produce, supported with a variety of labels. The consumer segments of healthy eaters, allergy sufferers, parents with young children, etc. So this is growing in the UK. Steady growth since the recession, 6% in sales every year. Strong growth through independent outlets and home delivery. For example, sales in supermarkets in 2017 only rose by 4.2%. Sales in independent outlets rose by almost 10%, and home delivery services growing organic by 9.5%. And fresh produce accounts for 25% of organic sales in the total food category. This is being driven by consumer increased value of trust, transparency, and traceability on organic products, organic industry. So, just to tell you how the increase in trade is happening, this figure from 2001 to 2016 shows you the value. The green are fruits, the orange are vegetables. So while about 16 years ago, the total value of trade was about 35 billion. In 2016, the most recent year, is about 110 billion. This is a threefold increase in a period of trade in about a 50-year period, which is pretty substantial, even compared to many other goods that are traded. So we can say that this industry is becoming more and more global. And given the changes in demand and in supply that are happening at this moment, it's more likely to be so. Yeah. And this, what's interesting is because improvements in technology, you see more and more increase in high value fruits and vegetables. It's not bananas. You know, bananas still big in volume, but in value it's losing value. So it's more other products that have more value on a per capita. So now, talking about trade in general and how do we see the world, this global trade pattern, we can see that there are three main blocks. Here, very briefly, one is European, Europe, and that includes the UK, is a leading destination market. So there is 50% import share in terms of fruits and vegetable consumption. Interregional vegetable trade is very important between countries in the EU and also, you know, with the UK so far. Imports of fruit and fruit juice from peripheral countries, you know, Eastern European countries are ex-colonies in Africa, so that's a very important block of trade so far. Then you have North America, substantial trade growth after signing the North American Free Trade Agreement. There is a very, very strong the market for vegetables is basically completely integrated between Canada, Mexico, and the US. Exporting mostly to Asian countries and importing from South America and Southern Hemisphere regions in general, juice and off-season fresh fruits. And then we have the third one, which is dominated by Chinese exports and Japanese imports here, and has experienced substantial growth since the mid-90s. Demand-driven, rising population, increasing incomes, and policy changes that have facilitated more trade in this region. And there is also an increasing trade north to south, so south to north, and north to south in this region. So this is what's happening in terms of trade blocks, what's happening globally. Let's look 5 minutes into the UK situation, and then I talked about Brexit. So one thing that is very important is the growth in regional trade agreements around the world. And I have also highlighted the ones that the UK is participating in. So we see that there is a huge number of regional trade agreements, more than 300. The UK has about around 30 free trade agreements at the moment, in general. I think with Brexit, this is likely to increase, to have the need or the interest in developing new trade agreements is going to have huge impact on the produce industry, both for importers and exporters in the UK. Businesses in the UK that will have some import-export limits. So just briefly in the UK, when we think about the basics, home production of vegetables is about 54% is dominated by carrots and cabbage. Fairly constant production value. And interestingly, field-grown vegetables are rising. Protected vegetables in greenhouses has declined a little bit. But it's dominated by these two products. And in terms of fresh produce, as we mentioned before, the UK depends heavily on imports. More than 90% are import, except for apples. There are some very, very unique varieties that are also exported to other countries, but is dominated by apples. So, but as we said, this graph that presents imports and exports, even compared to other edible products, see that fresh produce is where we depend more on imports, and is where the value of trade is more important in the UK relative to other important products such as sugars, animal feed, coffee, fish, dairy, cereals, meats, etc. It's a very sensitive sector to trade. And of course, in the case, imports are way higher levels than exports. So if we look at the trade balance, just as in the last almost 20 years, see that there is a deficit because we mostly are importing vegetables, but it's fairly stable, has been fairly stable for the past 15 years. When we look at the UK fruit trade, fruit in particular, see that the gap or the deficit is much higher, and it has the trend, because consumption of fruits is increased, it has increased, imports are increasing, domestic production is rather constant, therefore the net or the deficit in fruit trade is increasing. Okay? So who are the partners for the UK, the main partners? So we import mostly from Spain, 20%, then Netherlands, then Germany, France, Belgium, and then the US. So the most important for fresh. So we see here that that one observation here is that notice that all these are EU countries, only the US is not an EU, then you have Peru and other countries from the South Africa, very important, but these are the most important. So you can tell just by this that whatever is going to happen with Brexit may affect, the prices and the trade conditions with these countries, which are important suppliers of fruits and vegetables. There are some trends in the past 5 years. Trade with Spain, the main partner for imports, has increased by 4% of average growth, but the imports from Germany have increased dramatically in terms of both fruits and vegetables and some of the dried fruits, semi-processed fruits too. And trade with the US, imports from the US have increased also substantially. We see that this is likely to continue increasing in the future. Decreases trade with Netherlands, France, and Belgium is happening. So this is just a brief comment on the vegetable import situation. And this map is showing you how important the UK is for every country that exports to the UK. A color blue means that the exports to the world, for example in Spain, the exports to the UK are increasing faster than the exports of Spain to all the countries. So that means that the UK is becoming a more important market for Spain. The size of the bubble means the amount of exports to the UK. And this is just to give you a reference, this is 3% of world exports. So if you look at so this is the blue and the yellow, and then these axes is show you the share of partner countries in United Kingdom's imports. So this means that we import, more than 25% vegetables from Spain, 20% from the Netherlands. Yeah, and this one here shows you how exports are increasing in each one of these countries. A negative number, they are decreasing exports, increasing positive higher, they are increasing more and more to the world, not only for the US, to the UK. But so what's to highlight, for example, here Spain, very important partner, and a country that is exporting more and more to UK relative to other countries. So this is a very important supply chain to look at, and a chain that may be affected in the Brexit scenario. On the other hand, we see Netherlands. The Netherlands is a very important exporter to the UK, yes, but the share of the UK exports in all the products that the Netherlands is exporting is decreasing. So it's becoming, the UK is becoming a less important market today. Yeah. And we see here, for example, the countries in blue, such as Morocco. Morocco is importing more and more of its export are going to the UK, the United States, Peru, as we know. These are countries that are, all the countries that you see in blue are countries that are exporting more and more, markets for which the UK is becoming more and more important. Now, what you see here is that countries such as US, Peru, Morocco, they still have a very, very little share of exports in the UK, but they are growing. These countries are likely to move more towards this side as we move ahead. So this is in vegetable imports. So you see, for example, other countries like China here. China export growth of fruits and vegetables is increasing at a very high rate, 10 to 15% per year. But really, because this color yellow means that the amount of the share of these exports that go to the UK is lower. So the UK is not such an important market for Chinese fruits and vegetables at this moment. So this, you see, I was telling you the case of Peru. We can see it's very similar for the case of imports of fruits. We see that, for example, here is the case of Peru. Peru that is here. Peru is a country that the growth in export of produce is 20 to 25% per year growth, and very for a country for which the UK is becoming very important, same as Vietnam as well. And we see here the US, and of course you see Spain is always very important. So this is just an example. Just a brief comment on exports to move into Brexit. The volume of export is much lower. Most of the partner is Ireland. Most of 0.5% of the exports are to Ireland, some to the Netherlands, and again other countries in Europe. Yeah. These exports to Spain increasing to France. But these are mostly small volumes in general. So I have this I have this figure, but just to focus on two countries, Spain, UK is the most important supplier. This is the evolution of the imports, likely to increase for fruits and vegetables. Same with Germany. Here you see the products and the rapid increase, particularly on fruits from Germany that we are bringing. I'm going to skip these exports of fruits and vegetables because I want to focus on Brexit to leave 10 minutes for discussion, but trade between the UK and the EU are the major trading partners as we saw. Distance very important. Trade value with Ireland is of course much higher than with Italy or Spain, even though Ireland's economy is much smaller. But share of UK export to the US has generally been declining, but imports are increasing. So after leaving the European Union, there are several perspectives, and in the next two slides, I will comment a little bit on this, on perhaps impacts on industry and on consumption in particular. So one is to negotiate new trade agreement with EU region, which will allow for the free flow of still food and fruits and vegetables between the UK and the European continent. If this is not signed, therefore, the World Trade Organization rules apply. So likely the UK will have to impose import tariffs to products coming from the EU, because if the UK decide to do not have tariffs in imports, under WTO rules, you have to do the same for all the countries, unless it's a developing country in which you have particular agreement for help. But this, it's very important. If there is a trade agreement, particular trade agreement with the EU, it may be possible to negotiate to keep the no tariff condition that we have. If no trade deal is negotiated, and so then trade under WTO rules will apply, then the UK will have to impose or pay tariffs and face other barriers to trade. So let's talk about how might Brexit affect food prices, and in particular fruits and vegetable prices. Yeah. So we know that about 30% of the value of food that UK households purchase are imported, and this is much higher when we think about fruits and vegetables. So there are two types of impacts that we need to think about when we think about Brexit. One is that we know that UK is mostly an importer of fruits and fresh produce. Yeah. So there is the concern about exchange rates, and then there's the concern about changes in import and export tariffs. Yeah. So what happened after Brexit was voted is that the sterling depreciated about 13% in a period of 1 year. When the currency depreciates, what is happening is that you need more sterlings to buy products that are imported. They become more expensive for consumers. So just because of the effect, and I will show you a previous experience during the recession, when there was a depreciation of the sterling, what was the impact on food prices? And it was clear, and in particular fruits and vegetables. So there is the impact on exchange rates, but also the impact on import tariffs. I will say this: there is some certainty on this. There is a lot of uncertainty of what's happening here, because so far we have no tariffs, particularly with the EU, but there may be more. So So changes in imports and export tariffs for fresh products are uncertain. The main message is still there is a great deal of uncertainty over what the nature of the UK export-Brexit trading agreement will be. But let me show you this graph here from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And let's go back 10 years ago, during the recession. And this is the solid line shows the value, the exchange rate of the sterling, and these dotted lines are two indices showing food prices. One is the consumer, and the other is for producers, producer food prices indices. You see that when there was a sharp depreciation of the sterling in 2007-8, then food prices relative to all items increased dramatically, exactly during that period. Yeah? So the depreciation of the sterling was about 22%. Food prices increased by 16% relative to other goods in the economy. Why? Because we import a lot of goods we had to purchase, and the sterling buy less from imported products because the currency depreciated, and that resulted in higher food prices. So what we see here after Brexit is that, again, there was a smaller level, but also depreciation of the sterling. Now I have to say that this is stable. So, but this was about 15%, but we see that food prices have increased a little bit, including the prices for fruits and vegetables. So we need to go and see what are the long-term effects of Brexit on exchange rate. There is one way that we certainly know that fresh produce is going to become more expensive to consumers. In terms of the tariffs, as I mentioned, there is lots of uncertainty because the UK trades with non-EU countries has to be ruled under the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So if there is no free agreement, there is Brexit. So the UK has to use exactly the same rules to trade with the EU countries that with other countries, and then may imply the need for tariffs, both import and export tariffs for products coming into the UK and exiting. So what we see is that in response, I think that what's going to happen is that the trade relationship with the US is going to continue strengthening over the years. Vegetable and fruit exports have increased, and both imports, and the same is happening with some Middle Eastern countries with which the UK enjoys some trade surplus. And another point to take into account is the growing demand from Asian and African countries that offer opportunities to off-season opportunities to export. But as we see, because the UK is mostly an importer, the industry depends on imports. It does some re-exports of products, but we see that the most immediate impact of Brexit is that through depreciation, maybe the prices of fruits and vegetables will become more expensive. Some types of households may not be affected, but lower income households may substitute fruits because they become too expensive with other types of products that are produced domestically. Now, regarding tariffs, there is the uncertainty on the ability to have new trade agreements that allow free imports and exports of fruits and vegetables with the main trade partner, which is the EU. Otherwise, likely to further increase the prices, increase the cost of produce, because of tariffs will have to be applied. Because I can see that the UK is unlikely to have zero tariffs with the rest of the world as well. Okay, so I think that's the main message here. Took me a little bit more time. Thank you for your attention, and we have 5 minutes of questions.
We have plenty of time for questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Speaking of questions, audience? I'll go ahead, please.
Yes. I have a question. Alex von Schemper, Cool Logistics. With Brexit, I asked that question before. I haven't got other audiences. Do you think that there's a risk that this country will just start eating frozen food and processed food because it's already an underlying trend, and that Brexit could basically just tip the balance? Because if the long-term effect on on food prices is that they will go up, there's a risk of substitution, that we're going to basically buy more of what's cheaper.
Yes.
Do you see that there's a real risk of this, or is it just fear-mongering?
No, I think that may be so it's not going to be, depends on the segment of the population. I think the lower income households are going to do that substitution. So I think to some extent that...
So the north will eat frozen and the south will eat fresh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just treating it brutally. Is that, I mean, can one
Yes,
almost say this? In England, no?
If there is no, so if the free trade agreement with the main partner, the EU, is achieved, everything is going to continue the same, basically. Because right now, what the UK has is free trade with the other European countries, but also they have a common tariff regime with other regions of the world. So if there is the ability to develop that free trade agreement with the continent, then I think the situation will not change. But there is uncertainty on if that's going to happen or not, and that will have impacts on consumption, I believe. Not as dramatic, but it's going to happen to some extent. Maybe people will consume more carrots and cabbage. Yeah. You know, this may be good for domestic production because it may boost the domestic industry as well. So you can see that there may be winners or losers depending on where you are.
You've seen increase in domestic production in places like Russia when they've had barriers put against them for importation from the EU, and now they've actually built their own economy on the domestic production,
Yes.
especially in the Novo region. But would you not see, if we don't reach a compromise with the EU, maybe sourcing patterns change and that the import cargo still comes in, but just from other locations which are near markets, such as Morocco or
Yes.
Egypt or Turkey?
I think so. I think that's a clear possibility. That instead of bringing citrus from Spain, more and more, say, from Morocco, and I think that's the type of things that the industry, the producing industry in the UK sourcing. What are the possibilities for alternative sourcing? Is going to be very important. However, I think I am very optimistic that because it's not only fruits and vegetables, and not only food, but other things, that free trade agreement with the EU is so important that has to be, you know, I cannot imagine that no agreement will be reached on having a free trade agreement. But politics is complicated, so it's beyond the, and fruits and vegetables is a small sector in the whole economy, so probably we have little control as industry to see to lobby on, you know, what's going to happen.
Questions? Other questions?
On one of the slides we saw that imports from Germany are only 5% into the UK.
Yes.
Fruits and vegetables, but it's rising by maybe 7%.
Yes.
What's behind this?
Look, I checked that statistics over and over, and I have been looking at the trade. Nobody has talked about that, and what I'm thinking is that in Germany, because if you see, there is it's not only one product but a variety of products. Tomatoes, strawberries, cucumbers, Germany, there is a lot of effort in control environment agriculture, extending seasons. And what's interesting is that you see that while imports from France are decreasing, exports from Germany are decreasing, and it's a little bit of a puzzle, but I think it's a combination of changing because it's not only one product. There are a variety of products, but I couldn't totally explain why. Yeah,
Legal question?
that may be important, or the expansion of German retail in the UK. Yeah, that's a good insight. Yeah.
Early in your slides, you talked about how consumption of fruit and vegetables was fairly flat.
Yes.
Yet organics was a bit of a bright spot. There
Yes.
was some substantial increases.
Yeah.
Was there an age component to that? Was there a particular youthful age
Yes.
group?
Yes. Younger people. Younger people. The younger generation is just, and they are becoming the most affluent now. You know, people, they are becoming the people that have a bit to spend are really have strong preferences for organic in general, not only fruits and vegetables, but in general for food. Yes.
And do you envision that the main exporters into the UK are going to respond by providing more?
Yes, and I think in organics it's interesting because the problem when you talk to retailers is that in general they cannot get enough organic product of good quality to meet. They say whatever I bring of organic I will sell, but there are important supply constraints to do this. So I think whatever supply chain is able to source good quality, predictable volumes of organic products is going to do very well, particularly with large retailers.
Other questions? Let's show our appreciation to
Thank you.
Professor Gomez.
Thank you.